Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. We're here today with our good friend, John Pavlovitz. John is a writer, pastor, and activist from Wake Forest, North Carolina. A 25-year veteran in the trenches of local church ministry, John is committed to equality, diversity, and justice both inside and outside faith communities. When not actively working for a more compassionate planet, John enjoys spending time with his family, exercising, cooking, and having time in nature. He's the author of several excellent books, including If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, A Bigger Table, Hope and Other Superpowers, Low, Rise, and Stuff That Needs to Be Said. His new book is titled Worth Fighting For, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending, from WJK Books. John also spoke at several of the spiritual writers conferences I produced and contributed to our book, How to Heal Our Divides. You can learn more about John at johnpavlovitz.com. So, John, congratulations on all of your wonderful work, and it's so good to have you join us again.
Thank you, Brian. So good to see you again, my friend.
So, is there anything I left out that you want people to know about?
No, man, you got it. I'm always, it's always so strange hearing someone kind of list your supposed accomplishments, and really, for me, it's just this is the life I've been living. So, thank you for sharing it with people.
Well, one thing I'd love for you to tell folks a little bit more about is kind of, how you got started on your own. It wasn't really something that you, I would say, chose at the time, right? I mean, you had a big church job that you decided to leave.
Yeah, for me, Brian, I have been a pastor for about 17 years. And when I started to really have tensions in my life between what I believed or what I felt like my faith was calling me to personally and the pastor I was expected to be, and having tensions between what I wanted to say and what the weight of the collective expectations of the congregation was. And, played that game for a long time, tried to nuance the words carefully, tried to slowly nudge my community to a place of greater understanding on issues of sexuality or race or gender. And, did that pretty well for a while, but I had started at a new church in Raleigh here about, 10 years ago now. And I didn't have the same equity of trust, didn't have the sort of relational capital, but yet still wanted to be a fully authentic pastor. And I always say after 5 months, I heard God calling me to leave that church. And it came in the form of my pastor's voice saying, "You're fired." And for me, I was released, and what happened was, for me, all of those tensions and all of the softening of my convictions and changing of my words, that went away. And I could suddenly speak authentically, and I could ask anything and say everything. And that is when the words started to reach people all around the country. And it's led to this decade of doing this work with this really beautiful virtual congregation of sorts. And it's something that I'm amazed by every day. And I'm just shocked every day. It's a surprise to see what has happened because of that simple exchange with that pastor.
Well, I've only known you in the second half of life, so to speak, for you.
Mm-hmm.
But, what you have done to me is nothing short of miraculous. I mean,
Thank you.
what you've turned into, what could have been a bad situation, right? I mean, I'm sure it was challenging at the midst. You've turned into such an incredible ministry and blessing to so many people. And, the title of your one book, which is, title of your blog, Stuff That Needs to Be Said, right? I mean, that, to me, says it all about what you've done and what you do and how powerful that is.
Thank you, Brian. I think for me, when I was facing that really pivotal, alteration of the course of life, I just said, well, what do I do now? That's always the question when we have a plan that gets changed or whether we change the plan. For me, it was, well, what do I do now? And the answer was simply, what are the things that I care about? And I'm just going to keep doing them. I'm going to get up every day. I'm going to write about what I'm passionate about. I'm going to share stories with people. I'm going to try to care for people who are hurting and see what happens. And I've just been really extremely fortunate that I might have made a good decision here or there, or crossed paths with the right people who allowed me to keep doing the work that I do. And so it's a tremendous gift. And it's also something that, going through all of this in my 40s, I was an art director years ago before ministry. And then so entering sort of this third iteration of my career, it's a reminder that you always have what you need to do something exciting and meaningful. And so it's just about you figuring out, where do I fit, and how do I, allow people to experience what I'm sharing with them. So social media was just an extreme blessing for me.
Well, I started off as an electrical engineer. I don't even know if you know that, John, but
No,
about the different, career path.
that's right. Well, and I was talking to my son, who's a first year college student, and saying, hey, don't worry if you can't quite figure out where you want to be, because I'm on, version number 4 or plan Q, not plan B. So that's just the reality too. I think so many people understand that you begin in one spot and you make decisions and your life meanders, and you just try to stay, true in that each present moment. And that's really what it's been about for me in this journey of ministry that we've been talking about, for the past couple of decades. It's getting up every day saying, what is the wisest decision I can make? And I make it, and then I course correct when I need to. And that just, leads you to where you are. And all of those experiences have come to bear on the writing, things that I never thought I was preparing for, but here it's been an asset to me.
One of my favorite Buechner quotes is, watch your feet, because where they take you is who you are.
I love that. That's so true.
That's what you're saying.
And it's the smallest, shift in the direction of those feet. So you may think you're making for me it was, hey, someone saying to me, do you want to come and hang out with some students in our church at their youth meeting? I say, sure. And I walk down these, 5 or 6 steps to this moldy church basement. And yet those steps led me to a completely different life. And those pivot point moments I talk about a lot, that they're disguised as ordinary moments, so we often don't see them. It's just about a simple yes, and that it changes everything.
Really, really. So let's get into your new book. As I mentioned, the title is Worth Fighting For, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending. So how did this book come about?
Well, this book is really the product of years of really the last decade. I've been fortunate enough to be invited around the country and travel to new communities and then reach people where they are online. And I now say I don't see myself primarily as an author or a speaker or even a pastor, but a collector of stories, a war correspondent. And so this book is really a product of meeting people in thousands of small conversations, listening to what they've been sharing, and trying to sift that all for the themes, for the patterns that I'm seeing. And really it was this exhaustion that people have been feeling, and it's related to, the last 8 years of the tribalism that we've been experiencing, the pandemic that we're still trying to figure out how to get through. I don't think we've really processed that. So they're really words to encourage exhausted people in the specific fights that they're in, whether that is the fight for their own mental or physical health, whether it's the fight for their relationships that are fractured by tribalism, whether it's their fight for a more diverse America or a more equitable church. Where does this book meet you, and how can I help people wherever they are?
Maybe you've answered my next question about who the book is intended for. Kind of like exhausted people that have need some encouragement?
I think, the idea of compassion and courage, and I think people of empathy, Brian, are rightly exhausted because we've been in this elevated state of urgency for so long. And I think that's who the book is for people who are saying, I'm so brokenhearted by the sort of malevolence and cruelty that I'm seeing, and to just encourage them. And whether that means reminding them of their own worth, or whether it's reminding them that there is a sprawling army of millions of people who feel the way that they do, who are asking the same questions. So it's really kind of a twofold thing, reminding them of their inherent goodness, their agency and proximity. They have a lot that they can use to make the world better, but also to be around like-hearted people in authentic community and doing the collective work. So that's just who I hope people who just need a lift, I say either a hug around the neck or a kick in the behind, whatever it is that you need that day. I hope that this book will give you that.
Good. Well, it's an excellent book. I should have held it up before. This is one of the advanced reader copies that I was fortunate to get from John and WJK.
Thank you.
So tell folks how the book is organized. How'd you put it together?
Yeah, we've structured the book around really different fights, different subjects that are worth fighting for. So whether it is your physical, mental, spiritual health, how do you fight for relationships that you're really struggling with? We address issues of democracy, of issues of the church, vulnerable people who are really assailed right now. How do we fight for them? So it's really trying to, by subject of the types of work that we're doing. Some of it is very personal, some of it is outward activism, some of it's internal wrestling. So that's how we've tried to organize it. So maybe someone's really struggling right now with a relationship with someone whose views are antithetical to theirs. We wanted them to be able to go to a section and say, I need some help right now in that. So that's how the book's meant to be used. It's got sort of short little bursts of challenge and encouragement with a few tips and things about what to do in the place where you are.
Well, the bad news is you've got plenty of things to choose from in terms of issues for people to deal with.
That's right.
It's good that you've covered the waterfront like that, I think. It's very, very helpful.
Yeah, because, go ahead. I was just going to say, and that's the thing, there is so much that people are looking at saying, I'm overwhelmed by all of these things. And the book is meant to do that, to address those, but then to also help people kind of settle into, where do I feel specifically called to do something in light of this? So it's trying to give them some empowerment in feelings of helplessness and hopelessness.
So you've got one particular chapter title that I love. It's called Progressive Christianity is Christianity.
Yeah.
Can you share your thoughts on that one?
Sure. The work that I've been doing as a pastor for years, a lot of the work that you've been doing is looking at Christianity as a faith tradition, looking at the iteration of it in America in the time in which we live, and realizing there is a tremendous mission drift in 2,000 years from what Jesus was doing to what many of the people who claim to love Jesus are doing. And so there's that constant, as I say, fighting with and for my faith tradition simultaneously. And progressive Christianity is something, early on, as we've talked about, getting a national platform, to me, that was accidental. People began saying, oh, here's a pastor who's saying some things I probably haven't heard a lot of pastors saying. So by default for them, I became some sort of voice for the Christian left or progressive Christianity. And the labels are only helpful to a small degree because we can sort of broadly define the ways where we're different. But ultimately what we're doing is trying to redeem something, a system, so that it more reflects whatever we believe the heart of Jesus to be. And so that's right now, I don't see myself as maybe a caretaker of progressive Christianity. I'm simply a flawed and failing human being who comes from a Christian tradition, trying to work out all of the things that I see and just share those in real time. And the people for which those words resonate, they can join me. But progressive Christianity should be an oxymoron, or it should be a given, I guess I should say. We're always progressing if we have an authentic faith, and it should always be stretched. We should always have a conflict between what we believe now and the person we were a couple days ago, a couple years ago, decades ago. So that's the kind of funny thing about those labels.
Isn't it amazing, how things have changed in terms of community? And how, you've, as you said, formed a community that's probably global in nature. I mean, probably predominantly national,
Yeah.
but that's not the way the world used to work, right? I mean, you only had like local community churches, and
That's right.
you had broadcast TV and radio and things like that, but they were one way, and you know, only three channels back in the
Yeah, that's
day,
right.
right? And so forming any kind of broad-based, geographically dispersed community was impossible. Whereas
Yeah.
now, I mean, it's kind of like you've shown how powerful it can be.
Well, and that's the thing, Brian. I remember when the first blog that I wrote that really sort of got me some national prominence or national recognition, I should say, was called "If I Have Gay Children." And as I joke, I was on CNN the next day, and underneath, I'm on screen. It looks very polished. There's a banner under me, and then it says John Pavlovitz, pastor. And I said it could have said unemployed and currently despondent, because I really, I had been fired. I didn't know quite what I was going to be doing, but I simply had some words that I shared, and those words did the work. They reached the people that they reached. And I began to see that that's where the opportunity is, that you aren't beholden to a system. You aren't hamstrung by whatever, your church or your politics. Those words can simply go where they go. And that's been the beautiful thing. Sometimes people share in the bio that the blog has now been read by well over 100 million people. And I always say that's not about how great I am as a writer. It's about how many people are out there asking the questions that I'm asking, leaning into the burdens that I'm talking about. And that's where the encouragement is for people like you and me. And I want people to understand that it doesn't represent anything about me, but it represents that they are among like-hearted people everywhere, because often the news can so skew everything and we can grow so disheartened. And the truth is, there are just so many people out there who are really trying to make the world better.
Well, as you know, I've done a lot of work with authors, and I always encourage them to think about it. It's not about you, right? It's how you can serve people,
That's
right?
right.
That's what really this is all about, this community building, and you've done that, right? I mean, that the reactions to your words show that, which I think is just really admirable.
Well, what I love about it, Brian, is that we can create the kind of communities that I think churches for years have said, oh, we would love to create a diverse community, but yet there are some things inherent that make that difficult. And so we had a book launch party here in Raleigh last night, and you get this, this room full of people who would never be gathered under any other circumstances, but somehow the thread of the writing became a hub for them. So they don't know everyone's politics or theology. They just know there's enough about what they have in common that they want to, be together. And that's the beautiful thing. When you're writing, if it's authentic, it becomes a hub around which people gather. And then that thing becomes bigger than anything you've done.
Absolutely.
You're just setting the table. You're just setting the table. You're being the host. So that's why I'm honored by that.
um, in many cases with books, I'm impressed by the analysis or the history or, or explaining something, the why it is the way it is. But I'm often disappointed that there's very little said along the lines of, what do we do about it? Your book is not like that, which is great. Every chapter you've embedded tangible recommendations for action. So it appears that you were very intentional about that. Is that the way you viewed it?
It is, and because it's different. There's so many things that we see every day, Brian, that break our hearts and that we want to, as writers, address. And it can be difficult for people to just absorb all the diagnosis of the problems and never get any sort of treatment plan, if you will. And so I wanted to at least have those moments where people can take in something and then say, okay, now what is this moving me to do personally? And give me a few tangible questions, give me something simple to think about, and then let me do the work. And so people are often asking, if I go to do a talk, they'll say, okay, we know all these things are happening. What do we do? And I always say, well, something. And then they kind of laugh. And I said, take all these burdens and begin asking yourself some elemental questions. And those are some of the questions and tasks that I've kind of put throughout the book. Because the truth is, I don't know anyone's story. I don't know their environment. I don't know the circumstances in their community. I only know those inherent things, and I know those questions and the grief and the struggle, and then I can help them process it. So I'm glad that you noticed that, so that people can actually have some tangible things to do.
Well, I mean, most of us can't solve world hunger by ourselves, right? Or confront the higher waterfront of issues. So, if people just pick one, right?
That's
and
right.
work hard about the one thing that they're really passionate about, that they want to see change around. That is more powerful, and that's the only way it's going to get done. Because if all of us try to do everything, nothing will ever happen.
Yeah, that's huge, Brian, because, I was just talking to someone this morning, Frank Schaefer, who I think probably well. But that, there are places in the book where, I'm inventorying the vast kind of things that we're grieving and worrying about. And so that can be overwhelming, but I always encourage people to lean into one or two of those, as you said. What are the things that really keep me up at night? And let those then say, how can I answer that longing or that need in my community? Where is a place I can go within 15, 20, 25 minutes of my home to actually help people who are, immigrants who are being mistreated, or LGBTQ teenagers, or, how can I fight for, sensible gun control? And there's always a place that you can do that. So again, the agency and proximity, I'm always somewhere and I can always do something. And then it's about me doing a little bit of work to figure out what that looks like.
Amen. Amen. So I'd like to read one excerpt from the book.
Sure.
God isn't going to ensure that our schools are safe for LGBT children. Love isn't going to make assault weapons less available on our streets. Jesus isn't going to secure our elections to prevent dictator wannabes from taking power, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on. Today, instead of looking to the sky and waiting for a pastor or a politician of some invisible force to come in and dramatically beat back the darkness, you wield the brilliant light in your possession. Maybe you're the hero you've been waiting for. Maybe you're the answer to your urgent prayers. Maybe hope isn't in the sky. Maybe it's in the mirror. I just love that. That was really
thank you,
man.
I appreciate that, and really that is the point. We can even fall into platitudes of, love wins, or, God is in control, or whatever we fall into. And they're born out of genuine belief in goodness of people, or the arc of the moral universe, bending toward justice. But for me, it is about saying, well, I have this place and time in the history of the planet. I'm here, and I have a responsibility to do something so that those who inherit whatever we leave get something worth inheriting. And so that there is always that. So whether it's faith that propels us, or our moral convictions, or our, or just simply our beliefs about mankind, what do we do to make sure that everyone is seen and heard and loved? And we always have ways to do that. Yeah.
So, as we mentioned before, your blog, indicates that you're not afraid to say what needs to be said, but you catch a lot of flack for that. How do you typically respond?
Depends on the hour of the day, but I think generally I've tried to realize that the only thing I can control are my motives. So when I'm going to write something or say something, what am I intending to say? How can I say that as clearly and as eloquently as I can to make sure that whatever my heart is reflected in those words? But then to realize that once I release those words, people are going to receive them completely uniquely. And so whether the hatred comes in whatever form it comes, or the pushback, I try not to hold the criticism or the praise with any sort of ferocity. I try to hold that loosely and just realize I have to keep getting up every day, saying what I feel I need to say, saying it as well as I can say it, and to some degree resting in the results. Because I don't want to believe the people who tell me I'm wonderful, and I don't want to believe the people who tell me I'm horrible, because the truth is somewhere in between. And so I want to get it right more often than I get it wrong. So that's really the criticism. And it's also some of the criticism when it's coming, let's say, from extremely conservative Christians. I usually see that as a sign that something I said has touched a place of tenderness in them, and it's causing them to ask questions. And I also come from the church, so I know what people think about people like me. I know what I was taught about people like me, and so I understand it. So there's a mix of, mercy for people who are where I was, and also the understanding that we're all going to be provoked at times by certain things and confronted by others.
Mm-hmm. Well, you handle it very well, and
Thank you.
You're a role model for people in that regard.
Oh, well, and I sometimes I blow it, fiercely, but I also again, it's getting back to pulling away from social media and saying, okay, how was this day? What did I intend to do? Where did I drop the ball? And how can I do it better tomorrow? And so there's always been learning about how to deal with this, because it's not natural. That's the other part. For you and me, if you're in a conversation with someone and you say something that offends them, it's much easier to navigate. It's much more natural. But when you're talking to people who don't know anything about you and you don't know anything about them, then those words can easily be misunderstood.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So one thing I'd like to point out to folks is that they can access free resources, including sermon series prompts and a group discussion guide at the WJK website. So it's wjkbooks.com/worthfightingfor. So thank you for making all that free material available for people to be able to use as resources.
I'm so glad to offer it, because it makes such a difference for people who want to experience the writing individually, but then collectively is where a huge part of this gets worked out. And so I love knowing that churches are already planning to go through it together, or small groups or community centers, because that's, this community part of it is medicinal, and it helps us to keep going and to keep fighting better than we could by ourselves. So I'm glad to do it.
So I'd like to shift gears a little bit now and talk about the whole concept of finding your next calling. You talked earlier about kind of the major shift that you took in terms of, finding a new calling. What advice do you have for people who may be thinking about going off on their own now?
Wow. I think there's all the terror of the unknown. It can make you freeze. But for me, that terror is so easily removed by taking the first small, simple step, because that first small, simple step gets you to a new place, and you cross paths with people that you wouldn't have met any other way. You get more information, which gives you better questions, and then down the road you go. So it's almost as if we want a lot of things in place before we begin, and that's usually not how it happens. So for me, it was, hey, I was just fired. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew what I cared about, and I knew something that gave me joy, and I just pursued it. And that led me slowly down this path. And so that's the thing. It's to not be afraid for that, to be walking with a lack of information, because that information can't come until time does what it's going to do. And so to just keep, begin.
One foot at a time. So as you look, let's talk about discernment a little bit. As you look back, on what you've experienced, what you've learned, have you reflected on how you determine what paths to take next? What is kind of your discernment process for making choices?
Well, I think it begins with first knowing what you value and what gives you joy, what gives your life meaning, to really understand who you are, and then to have people around you who not only understand that, but respect it and will give you wise counsel and give you honest feedback. And that's really I've been fortunate to have a wife and a group of friends who really try to understand what I see happening and try to be sort of co-conspirators in that dream. And that's really been the process, is getting up every day and making sure that I'm leaning on people who I trust. And, it doesn't mean you're going to make every right decision, but it means you're going to have people with you to sort of help you along the way. Because there's a myth, you could see someone like myself up there and it's johnpavlovitz.com and it's my face up there. But it's really never about a single human being. It's about a community of people. And I happen to be sort of in the front of that. But, living life alongside people, that's just the natural way community happens. So I'm a product of that. I never do any of this really by myself.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I feel the same way. I know some people can use meditation or other kinds of things for their discernment processes. But for me, it's been interacting with other people, learning from other people's perspectives, particularly, a group of people whose judgment I really trust. And so, you feel that same way.
Yeah, I feel that, and it's also just as you go, as I said, when you walk down into the work, you meet people and you get better questions. It's also, exposing yourself to different ideas and different perspectives and letting those things change you. Because the whole story for me was my theology in the church began to shift, and I had the choice of either, when life argues with your theology, you can either double down on the theology or you can realize, okay, I'm getting new information, and allowing yourself to grow and change. And that happens with people as well.
So I realize you just launched a new book, as of today, as we're recording this, it's the launch day. But can you talk anything about the future? Whether it's books or whether it's other projects, where are you headed?
Well, Portugal, if things go poorly here in a few months. No, I think, right now I'm leaning into, Brian, a couple of things. I'm actually exploring the idea of a children's book because that's been my history. I was a children's book illustrator and editorial illustrator. So I wanted to marry art and writing, and I haven't been able to do that yet. And I'm also really leaning into this idea of grief that I touch on in the book, but I'm going much deeper in, just the decade that we've gone through and the universal grieving and how we process that is really important to me right now, because I think that's one of the fear, grief, and loneliness are these forces that are always kind of hitting all of us, regardless of our politics or theology. So those are the places I'm kind of wanting to speak into, those inherently human things.
Very cool. Well, we'll look forward to that, and we'll have another conversation when the next new book is coming out.
Excellent.
So again, the name of John's new book is Worth Fighting For, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending. It's out today from WJK Books. John, congratulations on this great book, for all of your incredible work. Please check it out, everyone.
Brian, thanks so much for all you do, and really appreciate the time today, my friend.